How you doing, everybody? It's Wardy here, and we have so much to deep dive in our second video of the day, all having to do with the latest big updates in Mets land. As we came out with a video earlier today, please check it out in case you guys haven't already. We have further discussion not only on Pete Alonso, and yes, we do have some positive news on the Alonso front to get into since our video earlier today. We also have some signing news. No, not Pete yet, but we did sign Nick Madrigal there to a one-year contract. So who's Nick Madrigal? What's there to expect from his game? And what does this mean potentially for the future of Jose Iglesias, as he himself fits the bill as a true utility player? From there, we'll get into not only more on Alonso, but what is happening with guys like Dylan Cease and Michael Cain. The Mets are involved in the trade market for both starters, but there's one star that feels like a greater reality between the two now more than ever, and we'll highlight that. And before wrapping up the show, we know the Mets are comfortable with how their bullpen is constructed, but they are showing interest in Ryan Brasier among others, and we'll expand on Brasier, his game, what he would potentially be bringing to the Mets from the LA Dodgers, among many other things on the show, folks. So thank you so much for smashing a like and subscribe on as your first chime in. It's greatly appreciated. Let me know your initial reactions down below. As I said, we have plenty to get into in today's yet again jam-packed Big Mets update segment. But before we get into it all, shout out to our amazing sponsor at BetUS, which has you covered all your sports betting needs. But also shout out to our pitching contributor over the past year on the platform, that being Isaac Rothman. Guys, Isaac is blossoming with our very eyes. Feels like yesterday he approached me to want to contribute as part of the platform, especially on the pitching side of things. And now Isaac is moving up, folks. He has officially announced today that he'll be joining the Brewster Whitecaps of the Cape Cod League as a baseball operations analytics intern for 2025. He has so many other things brewing. Isaac, congratulations. And to everyone that knows Isaac, he has been a tremendous pitching contributor to our platform over the past year. We're giving us nightly analysis on various things happening across the game of baseball, specifically the Mets, when it's Sean Manaea making the proper adjustments, when it's Sevy going deep, when it's David Pearson showing that he is a true starter in this rotation, among other things. Isaac has done a tremendous job with his individual player breakdowns and just pitching breakdowns in general. Wishing you the best, Isaac, and we hope to have you on as a contributor yet again here in 2025, even though it's going to be a lesser role. I know you got a lot of things going there, but shout out to you, Isaac. And guys, if you haven't already as well, I was there with my guy Brandon London earlier today there in the official New York Post Sports YouTube channel and on their X account, going over Dylan Cease and why the Mets should bring him in, along with the latest on the Pete Alonso front. So check out that segment if you guys haven't already, as well as our segment from earlier today in the Bleacher Report app, where I am a MLB host Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern. We talked the latest on Scherzer. We talked about Cease, Cain a bit, Alonso notes, Alex Bregman, you name it, all the MLB hotline topics. We have you covered over there. But all right, guys, let's get into the first key news, which has to do with why you clicked on this video. Not so much as the other topics that we'll get into, but that is going to be first the Mets signing Nick Madrigal. So who exactly is Nick Madrigal, and where exactly did this news stem from? Well, initially we saw this from both John Heyman and Joel Sherman, posted them at the same time for the New York Post. But Nick Madrigal comes into Queens, folks, and this is a 27-year-old utility option that certainly has upside, and I know exactly why the Mets brought him in. As you guys see the numbers down below, putrid 2024 campaign. The guy was dealing with the injury riddle 2024 with the Cubs and had a very limited role when he was playing on their major league roster. Not even 100 plate appearances in 51 games, 0 home runs, 10 RBIs, 1 stole back. He's just a couple years removed from hitting for high contact, just below a little bit of 300 there. Madrigal is a contact hitting machine when he is right, and he's a tremendous glove. This guy can play up the middle without a problem. He can play again, whether it's second or third base, and be one of the better infielders in all of the National League. But the reason why the Mets signed Madrigal now on a split contract is because of multiple reasons. One, Madrigal is only 27 years of age, and he has a lot of defensive upside. He's a former top draft pick in the first top 5 picks by the Chicago White Sox back right around 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And since the Madrigal has not been able to find himself as a true everyday player in Major League Baseball, at least beyond his first couple seasons, and after he was traded there in that Craig Kimbrell trade a couple years ago at the deadline between the White Sox and the Chicago Cubs, feels like yesterday, and I'm pretty confident it was for Craig Kimbrell. You guys can let me know in the chat if I'm right or wrong about that, but I'm like 90% confident. But Madrigal is a web gem, as you guys will see in some of these highlights here beside me. But what the Mets are getting is another Zach Short situation, simply put. You guys remember Zach Short? Remember when the Mets signed him as a utility option, and he honestly looked solid out of camp, out of spring training, and then he cracked the roster not long after out of spring training, but that was short-lived, as he was pretty much a noodle of a bat, just more defensive upside. And when Zach Short's first play at third base ever for the Mets or in any position was an error, you know that's a problem, right? Jose Iglesias can get away with it. If you guys remember, Jose had some bad hands when he was first called up by the Mets, but then he got those nervous jitters out of the way. And it's important that we mention Jose Iglesias, because by bringing Nick Madrigal, here, who again is just a guy a couple years removed from being a very strong high contact hitter for the Chicago Cubs. Still has lots to give at the young age of 27. Is still a plus defender for sure. He's coming off of a down year this past year, but such a limited sample size. We know how good Madrigal's glove is. He can play all over the infield and has one of the best eyes in the game on not striking out. Literally in the 100th percentile consistently over the past 3+ years of his career out of all batters available there in Major League Baseball when looking at K percentage. Whiff percentage, the guy doesn't swing and miss there at all. And if he does strike out, it's a rarity that you're going to see. He absolutely is one of the hardest strikeouts in Major League Baseball, but because Madrigal doesn't really give much for you outside of being a contact bat that fluctuates with his contact ability, it makes it hard to really even give him a guaranteed role, which is why he signs with the Mets per Anthony DeComo on a split Major League contract, which means that he'll make this amount of money if he's in the majors and this amount of money if he's in the minors. And Zach Short, who signed a similar deal with the Mets last year, cracked the team, then the Mets ultimately DFA'd him. He was picked up elsewhere, if not that they didn't trade him. I know that he was with the Braves and some other teams last year, but Zach Short and Nick Madrigal finding themselves in similar fate, and Nick, who was a teammate of Zach's, is pretty fitting that he comes to the Mets in a similar role, just trying to crack the team out of camp, is going to have some really ooh and ah type defense that you're going to see in spring training. He's an absolute web gem. A lot of people like Nick Madrigal for his defensive upside, can also steal bags pretty well as a solid runner on the base pass. He's a very uber athletic guy, just not a guy that has the bat to have him sustainably as an everyday player in Major League Baseball, especially as a starter. But why does this impact things for Jose Iglesias? Well, by bringing someone like Madrigal, this becomes a greater reality that if the Mets do bring in Jose Iglesias, some things need to change from now up until when that would happen, right? Because Luis Angel Acuna, Ryan Brasier, Jet Williams, so many guys on this Mets roster there in the 40-man or so that are looking to impact them as soon as this year. It's going to be a tough build for the Mets right now when looking at their infield depth as is and where to find room for Jose Iglesias. There's some belief that Jose can opt for a bigger deal elsewhere, while there's also reality similar to last year where even after bringing in a guy like a Zach Short, now a Nick Madrigal, who's not to say you can't sign Jose Iglesias again and have them compete in spring training? You know, as long as Jose has a level of interest to return the Mets, it's hard to envision him not being in a Mets jersey in 2025. But if he's seeking more of a guaranteed role where he is going to play every single day, that's where I could see Jose Iglesias' tenure with the Mets coming to an end. He would be in a limited role, playing second base at times, getting reps, coming off the bench to help the youngins, and a lesser role than what we saw last year more than likely for Jose Iglesias. As much as I love the vibes of Mr. OMG, I do see why Madrigal makes a level of sense, but not enough sense, in my humble opinion, to warrant not going after Jose Iglesias for a potential reunion. I think it just makes way too much sense to bring him back for one more year, figure out how he can fit on your roster if at all, make some other moves, because the Mets have a filled 40-man right now, and they signed some guys in the early offseason that the likely DFA or put on waivers since then. So if things are ever changing with the roster configuration, Nick Madrigal may very well never even get an at-bat in a Mets uniform, but as of now, he's signed on that split contract, so we will see what is next for the Mets as they are pretty much rounding out their utility options. So does Jose Iglesias still fit that bill? Does he still make sense for them? Or is Madrigal and all the others that they have in-house enough for David Stearns to say, hey, this is what we're rolling with when spring training starts a couple weeks from now? That's a great question that I want to hear from each and every one of you guys, how you feel about it in the comments down below. Because as we talked about Nick Madrigal, folks, now let's get into the latest briefly on the Polar Bear. And then from the Polar Bear, we'll talk more on Yandy Diaz and everything. But like I said, we have so many topics today that I can't cram this into a 10-minute video as much as I would like to. It just isn't going to happen. But what I can do, guys, is pivot on to our next topic, which, as I said, has everything to do with the Polar Bear. Because as some of you guys saw, I did drop a video earlier today that had everything to do with Boomer Esiason on WFAN, pretty much making it known that he feels really confident that Alonso could return the Mets as soon as today. Now, obviously, I'm not the type to just view hearsay as the end-all be-all, but I do know that Boomer has a level of credibility, especially in the space with, I think of when he broke the Marty St. Louis to Ranger news all those years ago, 10, 11 years ago now. He's not known for breaking news too often, but Boomer doesn't go out of his way to put his name out there if he doesn't feel fairly confident, especially for a team that he loves like the Mets. So we alluded to that more in our video earlier today in some of David Stearns' comments from a recent interview with CNBC. Check it out in case you guys haven't already. But since then, we have found out through Pat Ragazzo, who's been doing a tremendous job on the beat for the Mets, Check out Pat there through an affiliate with Sports Illustrated in case you guys haven't. But he did make known to everyone earlier today that there are progress happening between the Mets and Alonso. Now, to what degree, that's a big question, right? Because to hear Boomer Esiason and others have an overwhelming sense of confidence that Alonso's going to return the Mets as soon as today, it didn't happen at the time frame that Boomer suggested that it possibly could have. I don't think he was being too serious about that, but I think he was being serious about his confidence in Alonso returning as soon as today. So, listen, we'll have to see it to believe it, but what we do know is that talks have not only re-engaged between the Mets and Steve Cohen, but they're actually looking solid. They are progressing, per Pat Regazzo, and we just had Pat on our last live stream, 2 live streams ago. Check it out in case you guys haven't. Great discussion with Pat. He does a great job on the beat for the Mets, but pretty much alluding to how progress has continued between the Mets and Steve Cohen, David Stearns, and Scott Boras in getting a contract done with Pete Alonso. This has felt inevitable, and it continues to feel more and more inevitable, not only based on recent reporting, but just the simple reality. We're a couple weeks away from spring training. How much longer is this really going to drag on for? So whether it's today or in the coming days, a week plus from now, 2 weeks from now, I still think Pete Alonso is in a Mets uniform when it's all said and done. And that's what leads us to our next now very interesting conversation, because as we've talked about Mets trade options, whether they are going to be the Ryan Mountcastles or they're going to be the Spencer Torkelsons of the world, guys with some control on their contracts and certainly upside. Well, there's one guy that also has a lot of upside for this Mets team that I'm really, really curious to see what his potential role could be if the Mets were to acquire him. Not so much on the role right away, but more so on exactly what they're getting, because he is among the better first basemen out of all the American League that we've seen not only in 2024, but we're talking about a number of years now. When I think of the Tampa Bay Rays, there are a few players that come to mind that are still there in the organization, and Yandy Diaz is in fact one of them. And as our guy Pat Regazzo reported earlier today, the Mets are among teams that have shown a level of interest and have checked in on Yandy Diaz. And when we look at Yandy Diaz, when we look at the numbers down below, and you guys can tell me and let me know your further reactions down there. Again, Yandy's coming off of a respectable campaign and what was a down year for the Tampa Bay Rays. Usually a guy who's a heart of their deep playoff runs that the Rays have had in recent years, or at least cracking playoffs. Yandy, now with more of a depleted lineup that he's had in recent years in Tampa, still put up respectable numbers. 14 home runs, 65 RBIs, a 281 average, a 341 on base percentage, and a 414 slug for roughly a 2-WAR season and a 120 WRC plus, 20% better than the average batter in baseball. And for context, the Mets have had multiple discussions with the Tampa Bay Rays for Yandy Diaz and potentially landing him via trade. Now, does Yandy make 10 times more sense if Alonso doesn't land here? Yes. It's hard to envision a world where the Mets would go out of their way to trade for a guy like Yandy if they were still bringing back Pete Alonso. But if Alonso does find himself not landing back with the Mets because something does in fact fall through at the end of the day, just something that's kind of unprecedented from what we know to this point, Yandy Diaz is towards the top of the list of first base options the Mets have considered, and the fact that they've had multiple conversations per Regazzo is telling of how much of an interest they have in Yandy. Guys, for those that are unaware, Yandy Diaz is one of the better hitters in all the American League. A true contact machine that can go gap to gap, and when at his best, again, gives you 15 to 20 plus home runs, not as much known for the power, but a lot more known for the contact and gap to gap ability. He can spread for all fields, which is what I like about Yandy. He hits for a high contact every single year, and usually he's an OBP king. Again, he's just a year removed from sitting right around the 380 plus range on the on-base percentage. That's why his career, he's a 288 career hitter, a 373 on-base percentage, and a 433 slug, 30% better than the average batter in baseball for his career, Yandy Diaz. I know he's 33 years of age. I know he's not getting any younger, but he's only has another year or two left of control in his contract. It's a club option if the team wants to get rid of him after 2025, and it is fully a free agent market hit for him 2 years from now in 2027, should the team opt in for that club option for 2026. Yandy fits the vibes as especially another Spanish player to help bode with guys like Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, Mark Vientos, Francisco Alvarez, list goes on from there. So I love that just for the vibes alone, because regardless on if you're Dominican, Puerto Rican, Venezuelan, there has been a commonality with these players and kind of how they've fed off of each other. The vibes are electrical with a lot of these Spanish players, and I'm absolutely in favor of them. Same way I'm in favor of a very exciting player by the name of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. next offseason when we get there. But in the meantime, for a short-term first base option at least, Yandy Diaz is among the best options that the Mets could quite literally consider. Not only is he more of a guaranteed option than Ryan Mountcastle, yes, you have less power, you could argue, but Yandy is just such a more well-rounded batter than Spencer Torkelson and Ryan Mountcastle in their respective points in their careers, guys. And as we further look at Yandy, just over the past couple years alone, per Fangraphs here, guys, again, tremendous numbers. A 330 average, a 410 on-base percentage, and a 522 slug in 2023. Yandy and a Mets lineup with Soto, Lindor, Nimmo, Alvi, Vientos would absolutely thrive. And I know Yandy's known as that true leadoff hitter, so he isn't as much your true cleanup guy, but again, the contact and the on-base ability cannot be slighted at all. The year before that, a 296 average, a 401 on-base percentage, a 423 slug. He's had back-to-back years of either being in the 145 WRC plus range or a year ago, 163, 63% better than the average batter in baseball, a 4 and then 5 WAR season, which means he himself accounted for pretty much 9 wins across a 2-year span from 22 to 2023. Just chef's kiss, great stuff there from Yandy Diaz. And as you guys can further see here through his baseball savant numbers, like I said, he's elite in certain categories, right? He might not be proficient in every single stat, and I apologize for moving that graphic. I did not have the right thing clicked there. So Wardy, let's scroll up and let's make sure that that is secure. Okay, so as you guys can see from the savant numbers now, in the 69th percentile in batting run value, 6th in base run value. So again, you're not getting a lot of the base running with Yandy, and that's okay. 31st percentile in fielding run value. Not a great fielder either, but again, you're not looking for elite first base defense with Yandy as you are all the other following stats. 73rd percentile in expected xWOBA, 88th percentile in expected batting average, 65th in expected slugging, 92nd in average exit velocity. So even though Yandy isn't known for his home run power, the guy hits hard big time, and he goes gap to gap for those doubles plenty. 92nd percentile, folks. Then we have the 48th percentile, so right around league average in barrel percentage, 89th in hard hit percentage, 4th percentile in sweet spot, so not good on the sweet spot, but elite there in hard hit percentage, 73rd in bat speed, 93rd in squared up percentage, 88th in chase percentage, and 97th in whip percentage, K percentage 86, watt percentage 52nd. This guy is such a menace at the plate. To think of what he could do working around the other weapons in this lineup, I think would be an absolute thing of beauty. So listen, if Pete Alonso, for one reason or the other, does not find himself back in Queens, and the Mets do follow suit with one of these trade options, then they need to make sure that Yandy Diaz is towards the top of the pecking order as to a priority list. And it's not like David Stearns doesn't have familiarity with trading with the Rays. He actually has more familiarity with trading with the Rays versus other clubs in recent years. Let's not forget when David Stearns was the GM of the Milwaukee Brewers, he acquired Willy Adames in that blockbuster trade, which benefited both sides as it happened, especially for the Brewers there. Fast forward since then, he's made multiple moves with the Tampa Bay Rays, including guys that we have seen, that being in Phil Maton, acquired by the Mets from the Rays right around June or so of last season, and also Tyler Zuber, a reliever who came out of nowhere, initially wasn't in Major League Baseball for a couple years, works in independent leagues, works what we saw there, if I'm not mistaken, with one of the independent leagues there out of New York. I'm just blanking right, the Long Island Ducks, I believe. Throws absolute gas. He puts up some solid early numbers with the Rays in their organization. The Mets pick him up at the deadline in a lesser trade, and Zuber is looking to impact this Mets bullpen in 2025. So we've seen Stearns go out of his way to trade with Tampa. Let's see if he's willing to do it again, this time for a bigger piece than he's ever acquired, at least as Mets Pobo, that being in Yandy Diaz. Let me know in the comments down below, guys. Are you for or against the Yandy Diaz pursuit should Pete Alonso find himself landing elsewhere? I'd love to hear it, guys, because now as we talk about Yandy, let's talk briefly on the pitching end. And when I say briefly on the pitching end, I say briefly more so on the pitching end on what it has to do with guys in Dylan Cease and Michael Cain. And from there, we will then wrap up the show by getting into a bit on the bullpen. Because as you guys can see beside me, not only did the Mets sign Nick Madrigal that we saw, but we also did see some notes as to a couple of the following, which I love to share with each and every one of you. First, let's start with Will Salmon, who does a great job on the beat for the Mets. We've had him on multiple live streams in the past. He came out with a piece earlier that said, why a trade for Dylan Cease seems unlikely for the Mets, at least right now. Mind you, this is more of an opinion piece. He does go on to say that it appears unlikely according to the sources that he's talked to, but it's common sense as to why a Dylan Cease trade right now feels unlikely, because it's going to take a king's ransom to land him. Even with him being a rental, we know that Dylan Cease is not going to come cheap for AJ Preller, who's just not going to part ways with ace caliber starters to stay in the National League to potentially help a team that's going to be pushing for playoffs while the Padres are doing the exact same thing. But as John Heyman reported yesterday, they may defer to Jack Flaherty or Nick Pivetta should they trade one of Cease or Kane, and Cease still feels like the greater likelihood to be dealt between himself and Michael Kane. And we'll get into that reasoning here in just a second. But first, why exactly are the Mets appearing unlikely at this point in time to have a Cease trade happen? It's because of the cost from AJ Preller. AJ Preller wants top prospects, guys that can impact the team right now, and the Mets want to make sure that they don't give up an entire haul of a farm or other key assets for what is still at the end of the day a rental. Furthermore, AJ Preller and the Padres have an asking price of Dylan Cease greater than what it was at the traded line this past year, because they know that if the Mets, if the Braves, if the Cubs, all teams are in the Dylan Cease mix currently, folks, acquire Dylan, that they will have the advantage of trying to negotiate an extension with him before the season even begins. That's why AJ Preller is having them at a king's ransom right now. That's why it's hard to pull off either of these trades. But while Cease may seem unlikely right now, it is far from not being a reality. All it takes is just a couple phone calls and for the Mets to show a further reason as to why they want to make it happen. The Mets shopping on the rotation front is further telling that yes, while they are comfortable to a degree with how the rotation stands, they know that they can and should add more, and they're trying to pounce on the markets that are not presenting themselves. Both Dylan Cease, as you guys see down below, tremendous numbers, as is also the case in Michael Kane, among others, guys. And as we pivot now briefly to Michael Kane, let's get into exactly why he is a guy that I could see potentially staying with the San Diego Padres. He signed a deal today, which potentially helps him with the cash flow, as Kevin Hayes, who does a great job there on the beat there for the Padres, alludes to. And his contract structure is the following, everybody. Michael Kane and the Padres have settled to avoid arbitration. It's going to be $7.75 million with a $3 million bonus, and it's really just a $1 million salary and a $3.75 million buyout on a $15 million mutual option for 2026. So how this benefits the Padres right away and how this hinders his chances to be traded are twofold. One, the Padres are paying less right now in 2025 than they otherwise would have for Michael Kane and have a more backloaded in 2026. Secondly, by having this contract be more team friendly with that mutual option, it's telling that Michael Kane has a willingness to try to stay with the Padres as long as they don't want to fully trade him. So he has a willingness to stay there if Kane finds himself having a down 2025 campaign for whatever reason it may be, or injury-riddled year, then he can opt in for that mutual option for 2026, making $15+ million. And if he has another, again, we're talking Cy Young caliber year is what we got from Michael Kane. If he can push to 200 innings this season, this is a guy that will not only hit the free agent market, but look for a long-term bag that the Padres will not be the team to likely present to him with their limited spending at this point in time. So can Kane still be traded? Yes, but is there a greater reality where Dylan Cease will be the guy to be traded between the two as of now? Absolutely. I'll be a little surprised if Dylan Cease is not the starter between the two that's traded. Again, anything can happen. Things certainly change, but Michael Kane inking this contract with that mutual option not only makes him more attractive via trade for a team like the Mets that would like him beyond 2025, so you can add that wrinkle in if you want to, but it also adds in the simple fact that the Padres got him on a team-friendly 2025 deal because they're likely not going to trade him, at least to begin the 2025 season. So take with all that information, however which way you want to feel. We talked about Michael Kane plenty on the platform, and we'll continue to do that should the Mets continue to be linked to the fantastic right-hander that has plenty connections in-house with the Mets with guys like Carlos Mendoza, Desi Druskel, Clay Holmes, former New York Yankees, among others. But before we wrap this one up now, everybody, let's get into our final topic. That has everything to do with Ryan Brasier. For those that did not see from the latest reporting from Pat Ragazzo that we absolutely love, Pat also did allude to the fact that while the Mets are comfortable with their bullpen, they really like Ryan Brasier. And Ryan Brasier was just DFA'd over the past day or two by the LA Dodgers, and right around with that $4.5 million hit for just one more season, Brasier is an attractive player for a lot of teams. Now, for the Dodgers, he's an abundance of riches, right? He is one of many pieces that they have that would have been good for the bullpen, but knowing that Brasier isn't a certainty for them where they don't need to rely on him after landing Kirby Yates and Tanner Scott, that's why they're DFAing the guy and hoping that a team takes up his $4.5 million, or he will be outright sent to AAA should they not part with him on a mutual agreement or something. But Brasier, even though he dealt with some calf strains this past year, when healthy, was nails. 29 games, 28 innings, a 3.5 ERA. The expected numbers are very strong. Yes, he got rocked in postseason with a 5 ERA. The Mets rocked him as he was the leading pitcher as that spot starter in the bullpen games against the Dodgers in the LCS. Remember that, guys? Yeah, we were beating up on Brasier good. Lindor beat up on him, among others, if I'm not mistaken. But he's still a very solid pitcher. Again, a guy a couple couple years ago was DFA'd, parted with by the Red Sox, picked up by the Dodgers. They get the best out of him. And entering this Mets pitching lab, I have an absolute level of confidence in the Mets getting the best as someone like Ryan Brasier. And as we briefly look at his baseball savant numbers, as you guys can see beside me here, they certainly fluctuate. He's elite in some areas and not so much in others in that limited sample size this past season. But he was in the 80th percentile in extension. We're looking 60th percentile in ground ball percentage. Really barreled, hard hit. Interesting. Hard hit percentage well down. Barrel percentage just above league average. K percentage just below league average. Walk percentage, again, amongst the best in baseball. The guy had a tremendous over K per 9 to just a 1.6 walks per 9. Really commanding the strike zone, and that would help this bullpen greatly. Whip percentage was down below league average. K percentage just below league average. Chase percentage right around 95 plus percentile. He was getting a lot of chase last year. Fastball velocity sits 95 plus there. On the four seam, he has the slider, the sinker, the cutter mix as well. Fastball run value right in the 70th percentile or so. Expected ERA right around the same percentage, 70th or so. Expected batting average a little bit low. Average exit velocity, he does get hit hard for sure. So not giving up meatballs is important for Ryan Brasier. I think the Mets could get the best out of him in their lab, but they already have a pretty filled bullpen, with the exception of acquiring a guy and dropping someone else. Would you guys be in favor or against a Ryan Brasier acquisition at $4.5 million? Pretty much what the Mets just invested in Ryan Stanek, but the main difference is that Ryan Brasier has been in the league longer and has also been a little bit more reliable at times versus Stanek has fluctuated. Stanek's a high flyer, higher upside versus Brasier. There's a bit more concern on the health front. So guys, thank you so much again for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Let me know your thoughts on all the players that we talked about in today's video in the comments down below. And this is your guy Wardy signing out. Let's go Mets, baby. Peace.